Good to see you all. Tonight we're continuing with our study of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, by His Divine Grace, A.C.Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Tonight we will continue with Chapter 6. We're up to Chapter 6, which is entitled Jnana Yoga. And tonight we'll continue from verse 11 onwards. And if you have any questions or any comments as we go along, then please ask. So text number 11 and 12. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses, and activities, and fixing the mind on one point. So this is interesting because Krishna is describing the jnana yoga process. And he's describing it through the process of Ashtanga yoga, which the message of the Bhagavad Gita, the next chapter, because this is the last chapter of the Karma Yoga section of the Bhagavad Gita. It is said that chapters 1 to 6 describe Karma Yoga. That's the first section of the Bhagavad Gita. Chapters 12 to 18 discuss Jnana Yoga, or knowledge. And then the middle 6 chapters, 7 to 12, they describe Bhakti Yoga. Now, as Bhakti Yogis, because that's what we're aspiring to be, we're sadhakas. Sadhakas means practitioners. We're practicing the path of Bhakti Yoga, sadhana, fide, sadhana, bhakti. Now, as practitioners of fide, sadhana, bhakti, we are not practicing externally the Ashtanga yoga process, this jnana yoga process, where we sit down, as it's being described in these verses. We sit in a secluded place on deerskin, kusha grass, and then we'll hear the whole process being described here in this chapter. Now, especially this methodology was prevalent in a previous age. It's less prevalent now in the Kali Yuga because people are unqualified. And because people are unqualified, it's very difficult for them to practice this kind of yoga, Ashtanga yoga. So we practice the process of Bhakti yoga, but Krishna is speaking in a different time and a different place. He's speaking 5,000 years ago on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna is saying he wants to walk away from the battle. So he's giving indications that he is interested in trying a different path as opposed to fighting a battle, which is something he doesn't want to do. So this is the Ashtanga yoga process, which is being mentioned here. So this process is not what we practice, but Krishna will describe it here. But the essential point, because this chapter especially deals with dealing with the mind. And dealing with the mind is one of the key elements of the Bhakti Yoga process. Krishna says at the end of the Gita, and he also says in the 9th chapter, Mammana bhava bhakto, fix your mind on me. Think of me. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. These are the overriding laws of Krishna consciousness, the overriding viti, or rules and regulations that we follow in Krishna consciousness. So We take from this chapter, that's what we take. We take the instructions that Krishna gives about controlling the mind and fixing it on him, as opposed to the actual process of Ashtanga yoga, going into the forest and meditating. None of us have ever done that, gone into the forest and meditated for long, long periods of time. It's something that's not natural or easy for the people in the Kali Yuga. Therefore, Kali Kali Namarupe Krishna Avatar, in this age of Kali, the Sankirtan process, Krishna appears in the form of the holy name. And that is the process of purification in this day and age. It is the Sankirtan, Jagya, the process of chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra congregationally. So, in these verses, Prabhupada says in the purport, in Kali Yuga, when people in general are short-lived, slow in spiritual realization, and always disturbed by various anxieties, the best means of spiritual realization is chanting the holy name. There is no other way. So Prabhupada, in his purports, Prabhupada once said, the purports are more important than the verses, which is a very powerful statement. We have the verses of the Bhagavad Gita, which are extremely powerful. Prabhupada explains the purports are more important because all of the meaning, which are within the in the verses, they are brought out in the purports. And we take the purports, and Prabhupada said we read the purports, and then we discuss them together and churn the meaning to bring out even more meaning. So this is our process. Prabhupada then says, in India, the yogis, the transcendentalists, and the devotees all leave home and reside in sacred places such as Vrindavan, and in solitude practice yoga, where the sacred rivers like the Jamuna and the Ganges flow. So Prabhupada is taking the instructions that Krishna is giving within the Bhagavad Gita and applying it to the process of bhakti yoga. Because in bhakti yoga, we don't just go to any forest. If we do go to a forest and practice devotional service in solitude, it's in the forest of Vrindavan or Mayapura. Right? We go to the sacred forests and we engage in devotional service in these places, on the bank of the Jamuna and the Ganga. Prabhupada then says, but often this is not possible, especially for Westerners. The so-called yoga societies in big cities may be successful in earning material benefit, but they are not at all suitable for the actual practice of yoga. One who is not self-controlled and whose mind is not undisturbed cannot practice meditation. So Prabhupada is saying that in this modern world, we have many people who go to yoga schools, what we call yoga schools. Yoga schools are very popular in the West. And people go to these yoga schools. But what they're learning is actually technically is just called asana, which is the third anga, or the third limb of the Ashtanga yoga process. Ashtanga means 8 limbs. So first of all, we have yama and niyama. Yama and niyama means accepting things which are favorable to our spiritual progress and rejecting things which are unfavorable. That's yama, that's niyama. And then we have asana, which is the third item, which means asana means postures, sitting postures and so forth. Exercising the body. And then we have pranayama. Pranayama means breathing exercises. So the yoga schools more or less teach these two areas of the eightfold system. Keep the body healthy, control your breathing, and then you can use those things in the service of Krishna. That's the process. So it's called Ashtanga Yoga. These are two elements, asana and pranayama. But for the devotee, we are not interested. We may practice some asana, we may practice some pranayama, breathing and yogic exercise to get the body healthy, but only to assist us in practicing our sadhana of bhakti yoga. So this is the process which is being given here by Krishna, and Prabhupada's explaining that the devotees go to the deeper level of the process. We don't just stay on the superficial level of the process. So text number 13 and 14. One should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. So, Krishna is describing here the actual purpose of the Ashtanga Yoga process. One can practice Ashtanga Yoga. One can go to the forest, renounce this material world, practice postures, breathing, and then begin to fix the mind on Krishna, which is the process of the Bhakti Yoga process. But a devotee may do that, and devotees may have done that in the previous age, but the goal is to fix the mind on Krishna. And then it becomes Bhakti Yoga. Whereas Prabhupada explains that many of the yogis, they go to the forest and they begin to practice the Ashtanga Yoga process, but they may become confused about what the goal is. Sometimes they may even see the Paramatma, the supersoul within the heart. But then Prabhupada says if they're not purified, they may think that this personality is me. Right? This personality, the super soul who I'm seeing, that is me. I want to become one with that person. In other words, I am God. So that's why, unless one is a devotee, one may perform the process but become confused. Because one may think, that is me. He may have an impersonalistic understanding of the absolute truth. Whereas for devotees, a devotee will practice, but when he sees a super soul, he'll think, I am meant to serve this personality. So in Kali Yuga, it's not the process which is recommended for the simple reason that we can't practice it. We don't have the qualification. We can't even sit for an hour and listen to a class is difficult for us. What to speak of going to the forest for days and days and going into a deep state of meditation. That's very difficult for the people in Kali Yuga. It's actually not possible for the people in Kali Yuga. So, Prabhupada says in the purport, Krishna is the ultimate goal of life, and the Vishnu Murti, situated in one's heart, is the object of yoga practice. To realize this Vishnu Murti within the heart, one has to observe complete abstinence from sex life. In the Bhakti school, a householder, brahmachari, is allowed controlled sex life because the cult of Bhakti Yoga is so powerful that one automatically loses sexual attraction, being engaged in the superior service of Krishna. Other than the devotee, no one has any information of that superior taste. Bhagavad Gita 259. So, within the verse, giving up sex life, practicing celibacy. In any bona fide spiritual path, one must practice celibacy to become successful. In the path of bhakti yoga, we must practice celibacy. In the path of any of the spiritual paths, you must practice celibacy to become perfect or self-realized in that path. As Prabhupada points out, in the bhakti school, we practice celibacy by developing a higher taste. When one has a higher taste, a superior satisfaction on the platform of the soul, being engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikena, Rishikesha, Sevana Bhakti Uchate. When we're engaged in serving Krishna, the master of the senses, and then attachment to sex life becomes insignificant. Right? We just don't have attachment to sex. Right? It's easily given up. Our attachment to sex life. Right? It's easily given up. So this is the process which is recommended. Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita, Param Drishtva Nivartate, in chapter 2. When you have a higher taste, a superior pleasure from devotional service, giving up attachment to sense gratification like sex life, it's easy to renounce these things when you have something superior pleasure. Srila Prabhupada then says, the vow of brahmacharya is meant to help one completely abstain from sex indulgence in work, words, and mind at all times, under all circumstances, and in all places. Brahmacharya is taught, therefore, from childhood, when one has no knowledge of sex life. Without such practice, no one can make advancement in jnana, jnana, or bhakti yoga. So normally this is a training you receive at the age of 5, right? You live in the Gurukul, in the brahmachari ashram, you become a brahmachari, and you're taught culturally not to unnecessarily associate with the opposite sex. And that training helps you to progress in spiritual life. And then Prabhupada says, one who, however, follows the rules and regulations of married life, having a sexual relationship only with his wife, and that also under regulation, is also called a brahmachari. So there's no disadvantage in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement to be a grihasta or a brahmachari or a sannyasi. There's no disadvantage. If one's fully engaged in the service of Krishna, right, then one is becoming purified and attached to Krishna on the highest level. Prabhupada then says, perfect yoga practice is possible for a Krishna conscious person. And since the ultimate goal of yoga practice is to see the Lord within, a Krishna conscious person is already the best of all yogis. So we don't have to practice other yoga processes. For us, we only practice the Bhakti Yoga process as taught by Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion. Because that process teaches one to always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna, which is the goal of every other process, to control the mind and to focus on Krishna. Okay. Text number 15. Thus practicing constant control of the body, mind, and activities, the mystic transcendentalist, his mind regulated, attains the kingdom of God or the abode of Krishna by cessation of material existence. So Prabhupada says in the purport that the ultimate goal in practicing yoga is now clearly explained. Yoga practice is not meant for attaining any kind of material facility. It is to enable the cessation of all material existence. The cessation of material existence enables one to enter into the spiritual sky. So, the reason we practice any kind of spiritual practice, bona fide, genuine spiritual practice, is to release ourselves from material existence. All of us know you wouldn't be listening to this class now if you didn't feel that material existence or the material world was a place where you can experience perfect happiness. All of us realize that happiness is limited within this material world. And because happiness is limited within this material world, we have taken to the devotional path. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, everything in this world is temporary and limited in terms of the pleasure you can derive. So therefore, as devotees, we are more interested in practicing spiritual life, Krishna consciousness. So, as we gradually practice the process of bhakti yoga, of devotional service, we should feel that our material desires are lessening. Prabhupada explains this in the Krishna book. Prabhupada explains that how do we know if we're advancing in Krishna consciousness? How do we know on a practical level? We know that we're advancing in Krishna consciousness when our material desires are becoming less and our spiritual desires are becoming more. Our material desires are disappearing. They're becoming weaker. They're becoming less attractive to us. And our desire to serve Krishna is becoming stronger. That's how we know that we're advancing in Krishna consciousness. So that's the goal. 50% of the goal is to give up material desires. The other 50% is to develop love for Krishna. That is the goal of spiritual life. Srila Prabhupada then says, no one can overcome the path of birth and death and enter into Goloka Vrindavan without the proper understanding of Krishna and his plenary expansion Vishnu. Therefore, a person working in Krishna consciousness is the perfect yogi because his mind is always absorbed in Krishna's activities. So that is the goal. The goal is to fix the mind on Krishna. And that requires that we become absorbed in our mind in Krishna's activities. In other words, all of the activities, all the devotional service that we do so much devotional service, right? We do so many spiritual activities, devotional activities. And by doing those devotional activities, the mind becomes purified and fixed on Krishna. Right? That's our goal. Our goal is to fix the mind on Krishna. That's the goal of our Krishna consciousness. So all of the devotional service we do is meant to purify the mind so the mind can stay fixed on Krishna. So that's what this chapter is speaking about, controlling the mind, fixing it on Krishna. And that is the purport of the Bhagavad Gita. That is the goal of life. It is the param gati. It is the supreme destination, the supreme goal. So the Bhagavad Gita is teaching us through the process of Bhakti Yoga, which is the middle 6 chapters of the Gita, to fix the mind on Krishna always. Text number 16. There is no possibility of one's becoming a yogi, O Arjuna, if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much or does not sleep enough. So there's another famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada says in the purport, regulation of diet and sleep is recommended herein for the yogis. Only the Krishna conscious person can attain perfection in yoga practice. So Krishna mentions here, don't eat too much, don't eat too little, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Prabhupada once said to Umarpati Swami, one of his early disciples, he said, the path of Krishna consciousness is the moderate path. It's not too extreme. It's not too much renunciation. It's not too much material enjoyment, right? It's the middle path. That's how we advance generally in Krishna consciousness. So we have to regulate. We don't eat too much, but we don't eat too little. Both are not good if you want to practice Krishna consciousness properly. We don't sleep too much or sleep too little. Both are not good if you want to advance in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada then says in the purport, anyone who eats for sense pleasure or cooks for himself, not offering his food to Krishna, eats only sin. One who eats sin and eats more than is allotted to him cannot execute perfect yoga. A Krishna conscious person does not eat anything which is not first offered to Krishna. Then Prabhupada says, a Krishna conscious person observes fasting as it is recommended in the scriptures. So in other words, Rupa Goswami explains this in the Upadeshamrita, the Nectar of Instruction. The best way to control the tongue, the urge of the tongue, is to offer the food to Krishna and to only take the remnants of Krishna, which is called prasadam. In this way, you will purify the tongue and control the tongue. When a devotee only eats prasadam, the tongue becomes controlled. Then Prabhupada says, one should not sleep more than 6 hours a day. One who sleeps more is certainly influenced by the mode of ignorance. Such a person cannot perform yoga. So here's a famous statement by Prabhupada in the Gita. When I became a devotee, people would always quote this passage from Prabhupada in the Bhagavad Gita. One should not sleep more than 6 hours a day. Now, I heard that when I first joined. And since I joined, up until now, the best amount of time for me to sleep each night is 7 hours. I've tried to sleep 6 hours. I can do it for a few days, but if I try to do it for many days on end, actually, I can't do it. My intelligence becomes weak. I become disturbed. I become grumpy. And my intelligence doesn't function properly. Because Bhagavatam describes sleep is a function of the intelligence. And although Prabhupada says here in the Bhagavad Gita, 6 hours sleep is enough per day, there's actually other statements by Prabhupada where Prabhupada sometimes says 7, he sometimes even says 8 hours of sleep. It's different. Prabhupada said it's different for every individual. There are some devotees in our movement who only sleep 4 hours a day. Prabhupada himself only slept, rested for 2, 3, 4 hours a day. There's devotees who can do that. I can't do that. I don't have the qualification. I'm not purified enough to do that. But we have to work out how much sleep we need to serve Krishna effectively. Too much sleep is not good. Too little sleep is not good. Text number 17. He who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation, and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. So the Prabhupada says in the purport, extravagance in the matter of eating, sleeping, defending, and mating, which are demands of the body, can block advancement in the practice of yoga. So Krishna mentions 4 things in this verse. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Don't work too much, don't work too little. Don't recreate too much, but don't recreate too little. So Krishna mentions these different items, right? We have to be balanced. Ideally, it's very hard in this modern era because it's so materialistic. But a devotee needs to be balanced in his eating, his sleeping, his work, and his recreation. Not too much, not too little. That will help you advance in Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada says in the purport, don't be extravagant in eating, sleeping, mating, or defending, right? Which are these animalistic propensities. You have to control these things if you want to advance in Krishna consciousness. Then Prabhupada says, a Krishna conscious person is always alert in the discharge of his duties in Krishna consciousness. And therefore, any unnecessary time spent sleeping is considered a great loss. So, Prabhupada then says, as far as work is concerned, a Krishna conscious person does not do anything which is not connected with Krishna's interest. And thus his work is always regulated and is untainted by sense gratification. So as devotees, our work must be connected with Krishna. It must be for the pleasure of Krishna. That's how we advance in Krishna consciousness, when our work is connected to him. And then Prabhupada says, since there is no question of sense gratification, there is no material leisure for a person in Krishna consciousness. And because he is regulated in all his work, speech, sleep, wakefulness, and all other bodily activities, there is no material misery for him. So a devotee doesn't engage in materialistic activities. He just engages in devotional activities, and this helps him become purified in Krishna consciousness. Text number 18. When the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. Prabhupada then says, unless the mind is fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna, by constant remembrance, such transcendental engagements are not practical. In devotional service, these prescribed activities are called archana, or engaging all the senses in the service of Krishna. The senses and mind require engagements. Simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, for people in general, especially grihastas, transcendental engagement of the senses and mind is the perfect process for transcendental achievement, which is called yukta in the Bhagavad Gita. So all of our activities are meant to be engaged in Krishna's service, because then the mind will think of Krishna naturally. Like if you're cooking and you're cooking your dinner, but while you're cooking dinner, you're thinking, this dinner will not be enjoyed by me, but rather I'm cooking it for Krishna's pleasure, and I will offer it to him first. So automatically, while you're doing that activity of devotional service, you're cooking, you're meditating on Krishna, and you're becoming purified. The mind is becoming focused on Krishna. So that is the process of how we focus on Krishna. Prabhupada then says, as a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist whose mind is controlled remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Then Prabhupada says, a truly Krishna conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Krishna, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place. So that is our goal. You know, what Krishna is speaking of in chapter 6 is how to control the mind. So we want to control the mind so it becomes like a lamp in a windless place. The nature of the mind, the material mind, is chanchala. Chanchala means flickering. Like when you put a candle in a place where there's some breeze, it begins to flicker. So we want to become, we want to develop the practice where the mind does not, the mind does not flicker. In this material world, you know, the tendency of the mind is to flicker. It is to go from one material desire to another material desire. The mind is always disturbed. It's unsteady. When we're advancing in Krishna consciousness, what is the result? The result of advancement in Krishna consciousness, your mind becomes peaceful. It doesn't move around following different material desires or contemplate the material desires or the objects of the senses, but it stays fixed on Krishna's service. So we need to understand how to focus the mind, how to make the mind peaceful and steady. If we follow the instructions in the Bhagavad Gita, the mind will become peaceful and steady and fixed in Krishna's service. Text 20 to 23. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of the greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So then Prabhupada explains in this, is a quite a long purport there. Prabhupada explains that by practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. After nirvana, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities, or devotional service, Krishna consciousness. This chitti shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is anandamayo bhyasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by bhakti yoga. So that is the goal of all of the processes. You know, whether one practices bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, or ashtanga yoga, karma yoga, whatever it is, the goal is to become free from material desires and to just absorb oneself in devotional service. And Prabhupada says, when you get the pleasure, you know, the taste from devotional service, param drishtva nivartate, by getting that taste from devotional service, automatically one feels enlivened. Automatically one feels. One derives great transcendental pleasure in the service of Krishna. One should engage himself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith, and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon without exception all material desires born of mental speculation, and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. So, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, one can execute bhakti yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodness. So, sometimes it is difficult, it is challenging. I think all of us can attest to this. Sometimes we find it challenging to practice devotional service or bhakti yoga, spiritual life, Krishna consciousness. Sometimes our material desires, they become very strong. You know, like sex desire. Sometimes sex desire becomes very strong. And one becomes distracted in the mind, in the consciousness, in regards to serving Krishna. So these things may happen, that sometimes we become influenced by our material desires. But as devotees, we practice perseverance, determination, enthusiasm, utsahan nischayat daryat, as Rupa Goswami says in the Nectar of Instruction, that we practice and gradually we overcome our material desires and material attachments. So it's something we have to practice as devotees, and then gradually we can overcome. Gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence, sustained by full conviction. And thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone, of nothing else. So Prabhupada says in the purport, by proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara, the mind being controlled by conviction, meditation, and cessation from the senses. Should be situated in samadhi. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life. Gradually, as we practice devotional service, we should feel our material desires are becoming less, our desire to serve Krishna is becoming stronger, and this is how we tangibly know that we're making advancement in our Krishna consciousness. From wherever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. And Prabhupada says, the nature of the mind is flickering and unsteady, but a self-realized yogi has to control the mind should not control him. A Goswami knows the standard of sense happiness. In transcendental sense happiness, the senses are engaged in the service of Rishikesh, Krishna. That is the way of bringing the senses under full control. That is the highest perfection of yoga practice. So, we are meant to become, as Rupa Goswami says in the Nectar of Devotion, we're meant to become Goswamis. Goswamis means those whose senses are engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Krishna. We need to learn to control the senses, become a Goswami, and then we can engage fully in Krishna service. And in this way, we can advance properly in our Krishna consciousness. The yogi whose mind is fixed on me verily attains the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. He is beyond the mode of passion. He realizes his qualitative identity with the Supreme, and thus he is freed from all reactions to past deeds. So Prabhupada explains, Brahmabhuta is the state of being free from material contamination and situated in the transcendental service of Krishna. One cannot remain in the quality of Brahman until one's mind is fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. Savai mana Krishna padaravindayo. To be always engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna is to be factually liberated from the mode of passion and all material contamination. So it is important for every devotee to rise above the influence of the lower modes of nature, ignorance and passion. Ignorance means we procrastinate and we're lazy and we sleep too much and we don't engage in Krishna service properly. Passion means we're diverted or distracted by unlimited material desires. So as devotees, we have to overcome these influences, right, and focus on our service to Krishna. Thus, the self-controlled yogi, constantly engaged in yoga practice, becomes free from all material contamination and achieves the highest stage of perfect happiness in transcendental loving service to the Lord. Prabhupada says in the purport, self-realization means knowing one's constitutional position in relationship to Krishna. The jiva's position is to render transcendental service to Krishna. This transcendental contact with Krishna is called Brahma Samsparsha. So that's what we're aiming for in our Krishna consciousness. We're aiming for the platform where we become absorbed in our relationship with Krishna. On the spiritual platform, our swabhava, our eternal constitutional position in Krishna's service. A true yogi observes me in all beings and also sees every being in me. Indeed, the self-realized person sees me, the same Supreme Lord, everywhere. and Prabhupada explains that while in the material energy, the living entity serves the material senses, and while in the spiritual energy, he serves Krishna directly. In either case, the living entity is the servant of God. This vision of equality is perfect in a person in Krishna consciousness. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. Such a yogi who engages in the worshipable service of the Supersoul, knowing that I and the Supersoul are one, remains always in me in all circumstances. He is the perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and their distress, O Arjuna. So Prabhupada says that Brahmabhuta is the state of being free from material contamination and situated in transcendental service of Krishna. One cannot remain in the quality of Brahman until one's mind is fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. Savai mana Krishna padaravindayo. To be always engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna is to be factually liberated from the mode of passion and all material contamination. So this is what we're aiming for in our Krishna consciousness. We're aiming for the platform of Brahmabhuta. Brahmabhuta means understanding our spiritual nature and transcending the effects of the modes of nature and our material contamination. I'll stop there for tonight. Does anyone have any questions or any comments on what we have discussed? Thank you very much for coming. We'll see you next week. Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai.
Jai.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
brother. Haribol.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Say Haribol.